Hi everyone, Alexis here. It's Tidbit Tuesday, and today I'm going to be describing the foot placement during the Vinyasa. And a Vinyasa is just the way that we say chaturanga, or the low push-up, to upward facing dog or cobra, back to downward facing dog. That's what we refer to as the Vinyasa. And a lot of times I get questions because there's a lot going on with the feet. There's a lot going on in general between those transitions, between those movements. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break down the way that I practice it and that a lot of people practice it, and then also give you a couple alternatives or explain a little bit why you may see other people doing it differently, and why those might be a good option for you too. So we'll start from the plank position, and this doesn't matter. It's not going to matter if you take a full chaturanga, meaning the knees up, or if you take the knees down chaturanga. Okay, I can show both, but I'll show it from the full chaturanga. So in our plank position, we start with our shoulders directly over our wrists. We're in a nice long line in a plank. Notice that my toes are tucked under, okay, as opposed to pointed. So what happens here is I shift forward onto my toes so that my shoulders come in front of my wrist, but notice I still have my toes tucked under. They're not pointed yet. So I'm forward on my toes, I lower halfway down. While I'm halfway down is when I flip one foot, I flip the other. So I point the toes and come to upward facing with the legs lifted, or to a cobra variation with the legs on the mat, either one. And then I re-tuck the toes as I tuck back to downward facing dog. Okay, so I'll show that one more time. I'll show it in the full variation as well as the modified. So for full, my toes are tucked. I shift forward, lower halfway, point, point, press up, tuck, tuck, come back. Okay, if you're taking the modified version with the knees down and taking a cobra, it'll be the same thing. So I start in tabletop. My toes are tucked under. I shift forward, lower halfway. I drop the hips down as I point the feet and open up the chest. And then option to push back through tabletop as my toes tuck under, and I come back to downward facing dog, okay? So that's the way that normally we practice it, or that we teach it at the studio, but there are a couple of variations that you might have seen. So one variation that you might see is that there are some practitioners that don't actually point the toes in upward facing dog. They keep the toes tucked under, so it looks more like this. They shift forward, lower halfway, and then they keep the toes tucked as they come into upward facing, okay? So this is by no means wrong, okay? Different lineages, different styles of yoga do things differently. But one of the reasons that it's a little bit more challenging to do that way is because when the toes are tucked under in that position, there's a lot more compression in the low back. So especially if you already have any issues with your low back, or depending on the way that your vertebrae are shaped, this might be really, really uncomfortable, okay? So you can play around with keeping the toes tucked versus pointing them, and probably when you point them, for most people, that's gonna relieve some of the compression from the low back. Now, some very advanced yogi practitioners, like I said, might practice it like this, and what's happening is they're not sinking into or hinging the low back. If you're practicing it this way, either way, you should be doing this, but especially if you're practicing it this way, you'll see them pushing away with their hands so much. Their legs are engaged, everything's pushing up, lifting up, and now all of a sudden I'm squeezing my glutes and I'm not feeling as much compression in the low back, okay? From there, I would just engage the core, pull back to downward facing dog, okay? So that is an option, but again, I think if you're newer to the practice, maybe try it with flipping the feet. And then the next question that I get about it is, what's the difference between flipping one foot at a time versus just kind of rolling over the feet and rolling back into downward facing dog? So I'll show you what that looks like, okay? The reason that I don't love this for my own body is because when I do it that way, I end up too far forward in my upward facing dog, and I feel too far back in my downward facing dog, okay? So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So from plank, I would shift forward and lower halfway, and then I would just roll forward so that I'm pointing my toes. Right now, I feel like my shoulders are a little bit too far forward. I feel like the weight is coming down and forward a little bit too much. And then when I engage the core and roll back over, both feet, my down dog feels a little long. I always want to step it in a little bit, okay? But it is an option to do it that way, absolutely. And again, that's going to depend, first of all, on body proportions. Some people can pull it off isn't the right way to say it, but some people that feels a little bit more comfortable in their body. So part of it depends on body proportion, and part of it is just preference, right? So I encourage you to play around with those to see how it feels. It doesn't seem super important, but it actually does make the flow of the practice a lot more comfortable and a lot more accessible, I think, when we learn how to really move through that vinyasa and flip the feet in the right way, because we do it so many times in a vinyasa flow. So yeah, try them on, see how they feel. Have a great day.